यच्छन्ति देवाः सुन्वन्तं न स्वप्नाय स्पृहयन्ति.
Namaste everybody. Thank you so much for all your patience. We recognize that this is the last session of the technical sessions planned for today, and we really appreciate your patience to be with us now. Our warm regards to the chair of our session, Shri Kalyanasundaram, and Dr. Ram Mohan ji for such an excellent presentation. We would also want to thank Shri Rajiv Malhotra ji, as well as Major General Bachi ji for this opportunity to be here. So the first paper that we are presenting today is the Aryan problem from the perspective of textual evidence and linguistics. So this paper it expands upon certain parts of what we refer to as the A of the ABC framework, which consists of 4 chronological milestones. A is for the Aryan, B is for Bharata as in Mahabharata, as well as Buddha Gautama. C is for Chandragupta. So these papers have been presented over the past 3 years. And the choice of these milestones to us authors represents key points of divergence between what we call as the insider drishti and the outsider drishti on the chronology that these milestones represent. And for us, these are game changers in the sense that if any one of them is revisited and challenged, there is going to be ripple effect on all the other milestones that we consider as the chronological, which forms the chronological narrative of India. So one has seen through the course of yesterday's presentations and today's, with particular emphasis being laid on the Aryan debate as well as the River Saraswati civilization, how central portions of our historical past have been disfigured. So as authors, Megh and I examine in our present paper some of the key elements of this contentious Aryan theory, right from the semantics at play to the pivotal states which we believe underpin this entire debate. We also establish the need for using multidisciplinary approach, apart from linguistics alone, to address the matter. We place in a primary position indigenous sources as that which should serve as central domain data. And hence we have examined Indian canons for specific occurrences of the terms ārya and drāviḍa. In them, we have compiled all this into data which can also serve as basis for any further research on the matter. Since Indo-European linguistics have been the primary template, so to speak, for the entire Aryan theories, we have also undertaken a purva paksha of the principles of this particular approach, including its validity, while drawing into focus 2 recent quantitative studies on the matter. So we will be highlighting some of our ongoing studies on the matter as well at the conclusion of the presentation. Now, the semantics of the Aryan debate has great significance today, not only in showing how the chief positions of the topic have transformed over the course of several decades now, but also to show that even engaging with a scholar's position on the debate is subject to the use of right semantics. Here we have a quick example to instantiate the need to be very clear on the semantics vis-a-vis the invasions and the migrations. So we have Tony Joseph, who seems to be very popular today. His name has been taken several times. In responding to the scholar Shrikant Talageriji's recently published critique of Joseph's book, Early Indians, he has tweeted that the phrase Aryan invasion doesn't appear in his book, and hence, in one swell swoop, he has dismissed Talageriji's entire critique. So the semantics of this issue is not limited to only individuals such as Joseph. Anyone using the word invasion alone while critiquing the Aryan invasion/migration into India hypothesis is regarded as polemical, distracting, and unscholarly. So thus, I think both of us believe that it would help to understand what really is the difference between the migration paradigm and the invasion paradigm, And we refer to Thomas Trotman's 2007 book, The Aryan Debate, for the same. In his own words, he says, a second notable change is a tendency among adherents of the standard view to abandon the idea of invasion in the sense of a rapid military penetration in favor of a slower, more gradual migration of Aryans into India, accompanied by warfare to be sure, but spread over a period of long time. So in Trotman's own words, warfare is central, even to the migration paradigm, with the central difference only being about that of the time period. So to round up our point on semantics, even if the difference, whatever little it is, and even though the word invasion still appears in influential sources such as, let's say, the Oxford Dictionary, it might still be best to avoid using the term invasion, especially if one is critiquing the Aryan migration into India hypothesis. As far as we have seen, at least until the 18th century, there has been no dispute to the fact that the Vedas and the Sanskrit language belong to Bharata and her civilization, and have in fact constituted an inseparable part of her identity. Among all of you here, is there anybody who thinks at least until the 18th century this position was debated? I don't think so. Now, immaterial of whether it is posited as an invasion by or migration into India, what this hypothesis is underpinned is by one constant, the consequence that the earliest form of Vedic culture and Sanskrit are not indigenous to India. So we highlight this because this often seems to be missed in the other more familiar arguments, including the forced parity between the so-called migrating Aryans and subsequent invaders of India, including the Islamic and British colonizations. So it is very, very important to be clear on this. Pursuing verifiable truth about the temporal and spatial origins of the Vedas and the Sanskrit language is not the same as claiming Indian culture is synonymous with or identical to Aryan or Sanskrit or the Vedic culture. It is not the same as denying any linguistic interactions between Sanskrit and other Indic languages. It is not claiming Sanskrit to be either superior to any other Indic language or claiming it to be the oldest. We state this emphatically, particularly in light of what is seen in Joseph's own book on page 162. He writes, first of all, Indian culture is not synonymous with or identical to Aryan or Sanskrit or Vedic culture. In our opinion, we see this as Joseph setting up an unrelated straw man. What is at stake here is not what is quoted in Joseph's words. That is certainly at least not our point. But what is truly at stake, and very importantly, as we just saw, are the temporal and spatial roots of Sanskrit and Vedas belonging to Bharata, and this is a completely legitimate pursuit. Having clarified the semantics and understood what exactly is at stake in this debate, it should be evident why it is ironical that our own National Portal of India, which receives a tremendous footfall every month, until recently as July 2017, not only carried the invasion by Aryans litany, but also more damaging statements such as what have been shown in bold. You can see that, the Aryans came into Central Europe and settled down into India, the Vedic civilization associated with the coming of Aryans, the largely accepted view that a section of Aryans reached Indian subcontinent around 2000 BC, and in fact the last one even further leading to what came to be known as Hinduism. So this was carried on our own National Portal of India, let alone any book written by any other outsider. Now, why was this only until July 2017? We will come to that by the end of our talk. With the semantics and states covered, we now bring into focus the title of our presentation, which is Aryan Problem from the Perspective of Textual Evidence and Linguistics. Textual evidence and linguistics form 2 out of the 3 dimensions through which we are studying the problem. Dimension 1 deals with the approach to this debate, which has been and continues to be dominated by the domain of linguistics. If you don't want to take our word for it, you have here Stephanie Jameson, the linguist, who in her review of the Indo-Aryan controversy has insisted that though archaeology might offer ancillary evidence with regard to the Indo-Aryan question, linguistics must offer the primary evidence. And scenarios that are highly implausible or impossible from a linguistic point of view are unlikely to be correct. The end of her quote. In clear contrast, you have others like Konrad Elst, who calls pure linguistics as a fairly soft evidence, that it is not compatible with just any state of affairs in the real world history, bendable any which way, depending on personal whims, and that the discipline of linguistics can only narrow down the spectrum of possibilities. We have James Clatson, who is an authority on Indo-European linguistics, being even more blunt about the primary of linguistic data. We quote, from the linguistic data alone, without taking into account the evidence of archaeology or early texts, it is not possible to draw definite conclusions about the homeland of the speakers or of Proto-Indo-European, or even the age of the language family. The Indo-European model as a model of language relationships and of linguistic descent tells us nothing certain about the origin of Indic civilization. Clatson's call for taking into account the evidence of archaeology or early texts, basically multidisciplinarity, which even General Bachiji was talking about earlier, is echoed not only by Paul Hegarty. We quote, linguistics alone cannot come to the most plausible overall scenario for the prehistory of the populations involved, that can be assessed only in light of the archaeological and genetic records and the cause and effect relationships that links them all. We also have Michael Denino, who has clearly listed at least 7 disciplines that you see on the screen: literary, geographical, archaeological, cultural, anthropological, and genetic, astronomical, and linguistic. We have T.R.S. Prasanna, who has added mathematics and metallurgy as a part of the physical sciences to this mix. In his excellent 2018 paper, he not only is clear that this debate is multidisciplinary, but he also calls for widely accepted ground rules for meaningful discussions among diverse scholars. All the more essential, having seen all the various positions that we have listened to over the past 2 days. We have archaeologists, B.B. Lal and so on, in India, who have been nearly unanimous in repeatedly reporting over the many decades now the lack of any evidence for either an invasion or a migration into India by the so-called Europeans. Now we also have archaeologists from other parts of the world who have joined this chorus. In some cases, they are even questioning the Indo-Aryan and the Indo-European construct itself. We cite here from Schaffer and Lichtenstein, who have said, indeed, the description of many contemporary scholars of a migrating or invading Aryan social group from a homeland somewhere northwest of South Asia is equivalent to an example of Anderson's imagined communities. A community of the past, which is imagined, created to justify a present identity. So the Indo-Aryan European imagined community was created by the late 19th and 20th century philological and historical scholars to justify their contemporary colonial, racial, and ethnocentric worldview paradigms. Not only is it problematic to consider linguistics as the primary domain, but one should also keep in mind the warning issued by linguists themselves on the limitations of using the domain to arrive at either absolute chronology or definite conclusions about the PIE homeland based on their data and method. We have Clatson again saying, in summary, the Indo-Europeanist idea and method do not allow the question, when was PIE spoken, to be answered in any really meaningful or helpful way. From the linguistic data alone, without taking into any evidence of archaeology or early texts, it is not possible to draw definite conclusions about the homeland of the speakers or the Proto-Indo-European or even the age of the language family. The Indo-European model as a model of language relationships and of linguistic descent tells us nothing certain about the origin of the Indic civilization. He's not alone. Having considered the need for approaching the debate from multidisciplinary approach, we also believe that linguistics itself should consider, for contextual analysis as well as primary data, the colossal repository of linguistic material, especially textual, from India. And we need to re-examine the data thrown by it. So as a part of our study, we undertook a study of some of the earliest Sanskrit texts, including Rigveda, Ramayana, Mahabharata, Brahma Purana, Skanda Purana, Natya Shastra, Manusmriti, Artha Shastra, Abhignana Shakuntalam, Kumara Sambhavam, Raghuvamsham. So across various genres, you have literature, you have everything that constitutes the central body of Indian canon. We studied them for particularly the terms ārya and drāviḍa to present a view of their contrast with the distortions that we now see surrounding as the key pivots of the Aryan theory. So the terms Aryan and Dravidian, we want them to be restored to their rightful frame. And as a part of this, we list and tabulate as exhaustively as we can and analyze the occurrences of this word to answer the following questions. What is the range of the meanings evident from the usage of ārya and drāviḍa? That's the first of our list. Is there any evidence at all for an invasion of Drāviḍa by Arya? Is there any evidence for migration of Aryas from outside and into India? Is there any evidence for Aryas migrating into India along with Sanskrit? Is there any evidence to directly link Drāviḍa with Dasyu? So as a part of this focus, we have come up with tables that are data rich and constitute basically a chunk of our paper. So we please refer you to that. And this is across literary genres. All of this data, we believe and hope, can serve as primary basis for other research on the matter. And our analysis is the following. Now, going back to the questions that we had raised, the answer to questions 2 through 5 are a very, very clear no. That is, we found no evidence for an invasion of Drāviḍa by Arya. We found no evidence for a migration of Aryas from outside and into India. No evidence for Aryas migrating into India along with Sanskrit. And no evidence to directly link Drāviḍa with Dasyu, or for that matter, dark skin. In the many references to the occurrences of the terms in, let's say, Mahabharata, we were plainly led to the same conclusion. Arya as a word is used in both genders to address a person of cultural refinement and noble standing. In fact, the word embodies all the beautiful, noble characteristics of man in general. And we have such beautiful expressions of it, say, in Ramayana. The term Drāviḍa has always been used to refer to a group of people, along with other kingdoms, but never at all has one group been highlighted against any other among southern kingdoms itself, let alone any Aryan-Dravidian clash and migration. On the subsequent analysis, on points of analysis of the meanings of these terms, apart from our work, we would also want to draw attention to subsequent work by B.G.L. Swami and to an older volume, The Aryan Problem, which has an entire collection of articles in a section called Arya in Literature, published by the Mythic Society of Bangalore. Megh will now lead you with the rest of the presentation.
Okay, so as you saw, we covered dimension 1 and 2, right? Now we'll go to dimension 3, where what we have done so far is to kind of demonstrate how linguistics seems to have certain issues even within from the domain's point of view, and why the primacy of linguistics should be questioned. And the point about multidisciplinary, which G.D. Bakshi has mentioned at least over 10 times today, is very important. While we think that genetics is in vogue right now, what is really behind genetics is actually the linguistic assumptions. So it is very important to understand and deal with that, even as we are trying to understand genetics, right? So in dimension 1, we looked at the challenges to the primacy of linguists, as the primary domain for evidence pertaining to the Aryan debate. In dimension 3, we look at some of the inherent structural issues of historical linguistics as we see it. In the 2014 Routledge Handbook of Historical Linguistics, wherein editors Bowen and Evans concede, I quote, "We may not have achieved a single generalized theory of language change," unquote, include that the comparative method, which they consider to be the cornerstone of historical linguistics, is used for establishing historical relationships amongst languages. Linguist Claxon, though, in his book Indo-European Linguistics, a Harvard-published text for linguistics, remarks, and I quote, "However, the operation of the comparative method does not guarantee a language's place in the family. Only the initial recognition that two or more languages are related can do that." Mark this is very important. Initial recognition, when did it happen? We need to think. Was it in 21st century? Was it in 20th century? Was it in 19th century? Who were the people who were making these initial recognitions? Who were the Bharatas representing us in that table? That is something that we should think about, right? And that there is no absolute set of criteria beyond the general rule that the evidence must convince both the individual linguist and the majority of the scholarly community. So there are no general rules, right? Keep that in mind when you think of this field as a very, very scientific and systematic field, right? Next slide. Claxon's point, the operation of the comparative method does not guarantee a language's place in the family. Only the initial recognition that two or more languages are related can do that, is reinforced when one considers step 1 of the comparative method, as found in Lil Campbell's Historical Linguistics and Introduction, which reads, I quote, "To begin to apply the comparative method, we look for potential cognates among related languages, or among languages which there is reason to suspect relatedness." Now, naturally, the question of circularity presents itself. If languages are already related, what relationship is left to be established? We need to think about this, right? How is this method actually working? Interestingly, senior scientist at Department of Linguistics and Cultural Evolution at Max Planck University for the Science of Human History, Johann Mattis, alludes to how surprised biologists are when they think about the restrictions in the comparative method followed by the linguists. He says, "A particularly important rule that is often surprising for biologists is the rule that says we can only compare languages which are known as related. We could, of course, compare all languages in the world, and people do compare all languages in the world, but the point is that we are not allowed to compare languages historically unless we know whether they share a common origin," which means there are certain set of constraints which are already placed in terms of how this analysis needs to be made. We need to understand the roots of those constraints and what drives those constraints, right? Next slide. In a critical appraisal of the methods of historical linguistics titled Logic, Fallacy, Reasoning and Superficial Resemblance, scholar from the Department of Computer Science of Montclair State University, H.M. Hubey, includes in his section Circulus in Demonstrando, a particular odious fallacy of this type is committed often by historical linguistics, and it's in this form. 1. i.e. languages are genetically related because method X proves it so. 2. Since method X says that i.e. languages are genetically related, and we know that the i.e. languages have been proven to be genetically related, then method X works. 3. Therefore, method X is the only method that can prove genetic links amongst languages. Do you see what's going on over here? Right? There are so many things wrong with this line of no argument that one is appalled that is continuously used, argument ad nauseum, repeated on practically every electronic mailing list, nary a complaint from anyone. This is a computer scientist's perspective on what's going on in linguistics. Now, contemporary linguist Angela Marcantonio's observations are rather telling. She is from the field, right? That confirmation bias has strongly affected the IE theory, that it has not been scientifically founded, that there is no reason to uphold the thesis that Sanskrit is genetically connected to the other supposed IE languages, that it would be circular to conclude that these attested verbs are inherited just because of the establishment of reconstructions, that only 22.6% of the total number of the relevant conjugations match Werner's predictions. Werner's prediction is a law, Werner's law of linguistics. Only 22.6%, according to her assessment, actually fits the law. So there are more exceptions than the following of the rule of that law. So that's that. How scientific is that? And that all the traditionally established IE sound laws should be revisited, and that a theory of this sort may be regarded as not even wrong, in the sense that it is built up in such a self-consistent way that it cannot be either verified or falsified. This is Angela Marcantonio. She's not an Indian. She's not a Hindu. Right? She's a linguist. Head of Delhi University Sanskrit Department Girish Nath Jha has observed the following about Indic languages: that the sounds of all Indian languages across families show remarkable similarity in terms of vowel and consonant systems, syllable structure, and the sandhi formation; that the lexical and morphological system show more cohesiveness. The similarities in verb root based primary derivation processes, as well as the productive secondary derivation processes, and compounding and similar syntactic frames point to a common heritage, and that the common vocabulary store of the Indian languages on both sides of the Vindhyas is in excess of 50%. Malayalam, the newest Dravidian language, has as much as 75% Sanskrit vocabulary when used in literal tradition. Tamil has 48% or more. This is G.N. Jha's assessment. Also, that the rich morphological system of Indian languages get extended into an equally cohesive syntactico-semantic system, Karaka. The linguistic common ground for the Indian languages extends to literature and culture, where the commonality increases phenomenally. Now, Lars Boren, Anju Saxena, Tarak Rama, and Bernard Comrie, in their 2014 paper titled Linguistic Landscaping of South Asia Using Digital Language Resources, okay, this is digital, genetic versus aerial linguistics, report that from their experiments, they recover both interfamily and intrafamily genealogical relations for the 4 major South Asian language families. That no indications of aerial phenomena could be seen using the method of the LSI comparative vocabulary, but choose to discredit their own results rather than question the dominant hypothesis that their quantitative results would actually challenge, right? That is how entrenched this division is. Now, similarly, authors of a 2015 paper titled Study of Similarity Among Indian Languages Using Language Verification Framework, a study that yielded significant correlations between Sanskrit and Tamil. Now, instead of considering the possibility of a relationship between Sanskrit and Tamil, which is what their quantitative approach yielded, they decided instead to call their own result, which is quantitative, incoherent. Right? These are quantitative methods. Now, if criticism of the comparative method, emergence of results contrary to established hypotheses from approaches more scientific and when applied on larger data sets is one step, we look at a Purva Paksha of linguistics domains already undertaken from an insider drishti and add to it. Now, one way to start that would be to be reminded of what was in Rajiv Malhotra's Breaking India, and I quote, "Once the Indian texts have been mined for their treasures, and these have been processed through translations, mistranslations, plagiarism, rejections, and extrapolations, and Indian knowledge had been securely relocated as Western, the Indian source lost its earliest glamour." Now, you can see a lot of evidence for this in an earlier book by Professor Kurada Subramaniam called The Theories of Language, Oriental and Occidental, which includes potential appropriations, critiques people considered stalwarts in Western linguistics. For instance, Humboldt, Kurada Subramaniam ji says, "I can say with all certainty that what Humboldt was referring to by the, quote, inner form of knowledge was the concept postulated by Vayakaranas, especially Patanjali." Also another quote, "The generation of sounds, varnas, described by Humboldt is exactly in line with Panini's Shiksha." Now, the other critiques include that of Ferdinand de Saussure, of Noam Chomsky also. So these are like the biggest names, right, in linguistics. People are familiar with it. Now, furthermore, historical linguistics itself is such a precise science that at least 17 names are in the reckoning for the title of father of this domain. That's how precise it is, right? Having not found one after looking, and in order to facilitate future Purva Paksha, as a framing step, we have compiled Table 2, a chronological frame of those considered to have contributed to linguistics as per sources from within the domain, the Handbook of Linguistics, Language and Mind Sciences, Language Classification, History and Method. Now this table contains 88 people, names of 88 people born between 1100 and 1900, arranged chronologically by year of birth. It further highlights those that were associated with the Sanskrit and therefore the Aryan part of the story, so to speak, and 5 names associated with Dravidian, and we found that 17 names have been associated with Indo-European linguistic laws. It was observed that 16 of the 17 names associated with Indo-European laws, keep in mind the word laws. When you think of laws, you think of Newton's law, right? You think of things which don't have exceptions. It was observed that 16 out of 17 names associated with Indo-European laws have some Sanskrit connection, underlining therefore the criticality of Sanskrit to the entire domain of Indo-European linguistics and their laws, right? Now, while we saw Angela Marcantonio's critique, next slide, while we saw Angela Marcantonio's critique of Werner's law, we observed closely that only one IE law was ascribed to more than one person, to be 5 people actually, to be precise. The law of palatals. Next slide. This law of palatals, after having mined Sanskrit in multiple ways, from at least mid-16th century, Sanskrit gets replaced by Greek as a better representative of the original solution on 2 primary grounds. Now this is some original critique of ours after considerable amount of research. The 2 grounds were that Sanskrit offers a similar vowel triad, E, A, U, rather than the PIE array of A, E, A, O, U, and the lack of representation for the short A and O in Sanskrit alphabet. Now let us look at the first point. Now those are the 2 points on which they said, after taking from Sanskrit, they said now we have to replace Sanskrit with Greek because of these 2 points, right? Now let us look at these 2 points closely. That Sanskrit offers a simple vowel triad E, A, U rather than a primary PIE array of A, E, A, O, U in light of native categories like Swara, as you can see on the table, which is from a Gita Press publication. Very useful, by the way. Like Swara, as found in the tradition. Now, A, E, U, as per the Sanskrit tradition, without doubt have a matra lesser than A and O. Okay? They have 1 matra lesser, sure. But what native Sanskrit category calls them primary amongst vowels? Aren't they all grouped together? How did these become primary? And just because A, O have a matra more, does that mean that one can make a statement that Sanskrit offers a simple vowel triad rather than a PIE array? Now these are important questions to ask because these are the questions on the basis of which the change has been made, right? Can the fact that Sanskrit's sophistication in having an internal logic to separate A, E, U from A and O on counts such as matra be extrapolated to make the point that Sanskrit offers a simple vowel triad rather than a PIE array? Now with regard to the second point, the supposed lack of representation for the short A and O in the Sanskrit alphabet, is that not rendered baseless, or at least at a very least a conclusion from inadequate consideration when one considers the following attributed to Pujya Mahaperival, late Sri Chandrasekharendra Saraswati Swamigal, also known as Kanchi Mahaperival? On going through Patanjali's commentary on the sutras of Panini, I discovered that Sanskrit too had these short vowels, and it was a comforting discovery. Patanjali says that in chanting the Satyamugri and Ranayina shakhas of the Samaveda, the short A and O are used. Now, the hypocrisy of hurling cultural ideological motivations, nationalism at those who are challenging AIT, AMT into India and PIE becomes evident when one considers the following included in John Goldsmith and Bernard Lach's in the Language and Mind Sciences. Now I quote, The dawning realization that there was an Indo-European family with a considerable depth in time and cultural richness served to provide a new answer to European issues of identity, which became acute as a new set of nations emerged over the course of the century. The Western tradition has long been ambivalent about the uncomfortable fact that it was the Semitic sphere, not the European, where a tradition of language, literature, and religion reaching back at least 2,000 years could be found. But with the emergence of the Indo-European family, a new family, the Aryan family, which was now ready to appear with a rich and coherent tradition, not to mention a powerful set of myths. The word Aryan was coined by Schlegel in 1819 on the basis of the Sanskrit root ārya, noble. In Francophone and Anglophone countries, one spoke of Indo-European, while in Germany, one spoke of Indo-Germanic, a term created by Franz Bopp. So the hypocrisy of anybody critiquing AIT, AMT into India by saying this is cultural, ideological motivations, this is nationalism, falls flat because this pursuit itself, Indo-European pursuit itself, was about their culture to start with. Now, while a comprehensive compilations of all appropriations from Sanskrit would be a natural subset of Purva Paksha of IE linguistics, in addition to Table 2 and a critique of the law of palatals as we demonstrated, we highlight potential appropriations from Sanskrit by a scholar attributed the tag the first great American linguist. Remember G.D. Bakshi mentioned things shifting from London to the US. Now Whitney was one such marker. You can see the number of people who have followed him thereafter. As is evident from this figure, Whitney is seen as a key node in various generations preceding the neo-grammarians, right? Now we are not going into all the details of that. So to quickly summarize, in section 2, which Manogna started off with, we looked at the usage of the right semantics. Do not use invasion when you're critiquing Aryan invasion or migration into India. Use the word migration. Otherwise, you see what Tony Joseph did with the tweet, right? Understanding what are the right stakes in this debate. What is really at stake? Is it just about people coming in and going out? Well, there could be migrations. Genetics might support migrations. But what is really at stake, at least as we see it, are the assets. The earliest form of Sanskrit, the earliest form of Ved. Are these indigenous to Bharat or not? Until 18th century, the collective civilizational memory had no knowledge of anything coming from outside. And we need to keep track of that, right? Then, so namely the temporal and spatial roots of Sanskrit and Vedas and all their derivatives. Section 3, bearing in mind of future treatments of the topic, we have dimensionalized the problem as multidisciplinary or only linguistics. So clearly it cannot be only linguistics. It cannot be only genetics. It needs to be multidisciplinary. We need to look at all different sources. We looked at insider analysis of what we consider indigenous sources. 202 occurrences, 191 occurrences of the word ārya, 13 occurrences of the word drāviḍa, 204, sorry, not 202, right? And what do those tell us? And finally, we have highlighted differences in the positions even within the linguists, included some critiques of the domain's methods, analyzed 2 recent quantitative studies, compiled chronological table of 88 people associated with Western linguistics to find the links so that future work can be done, and critiqued the law of palatals from an insider drishti, identified appropriations by Whitney. Now remember Manogna mentioned that until 2017 our national portal had it. Now it doesn't have it. Both of us engaged with the Prime Minister's office, with Indian Council for Historical Research, as well as the National Informatics Center, using public grievance and RTI. And while we had our evidence, we simply asked them questions, 7 questions. You're claiming there is an invasion by the Aryans, show us proof. You're claiming there is Proto-Indo-European, show us proof. And these statements as of today are not on the website. It has been removed. Yeah. There's a lot more to do, but the way we engage needs to be sharp and in the right way. Yeah. Some notable papers between 2017 when we first presented a version of what we presented today and now. Fantastic paper, 2018 by TRS Prasanna. If I could nominate a moderator for this Aryan debate from our point of view, I think he would be certainly one of the closest persons. I would strongly recommend reading this paper. Danino's paper at ICHR conference, which we happened to attend, excellent proof on further critiques of the Western method. He has shown very clear evidence of how evidence has been fabricated by the likes of Michael Witzel and likes. Now, July 2019, Journal of Biosciences, Volume 44, Issue 3. This is from a Government of India endorsed organization, right? There were about 10 papers, if I'm not mistaken, of which these 4 are something which are part of our ongoing study, and we are responding to each of these as we can. But this was a result of a meeting in 2018. Okay? In 2018, somebody decided that we need to get people together and look at this debate closer. But was it multidisciplinary in 2018? G.D. Bakshi ji has been talking about making it multidisciplinary. But the fields again were limited. Astronomy was completely absent. In a 2018 coming together, astronomy as a field, archaeoastronomy is completely, she's an astrophysicist, right? It's completely not even in the debate, right? Which is why it's important to be open and think of that framework which Danino had put out, and then we added, Prasanna added to, right? Now, Partha Majumdar's forward, he says, even though he calls for a multidisciplinary approach, but we think they have missed out, for instance, physical sciences, astronomy, metallurgy, literary, and linguistics from a point of view of critique. Now, Sonal Kulkarni Joshi, I think that was her paper on linguistic history. She's an Indian, she lives in Pune. Now, we see that in her paper, she does not address the problems of relative chronology and absolute chronology as part of linguistics. Now, we need to remember that where did this 1500, 1200 come, right? After Max Muller, until 2000, which domain carried this? Was it archaeology? No. Which domain actually carried it? So far as we know, it is actually historical linguistics. Now, if historical linguistics cannot even give you absolute chronology, where did that date come from? Where did that year come from? Right? It's something that we need to think carefully about. Now, she does not seem to address the point of critiques of linguistic laws by Marcantonio, who's from the domain, our critiques of the law of palatals, for instance. She ignores evidence that demonstrates similarity between supposedly different language groups in Bharat, like Sanskrit and Tamil. So this seems to be linguistics from the Harvard lens, so to speak, and not necessarily linguistics from a Bharatiya lens. And there needs to be a response to that as well. Michael Witzel is a name I'm sure all the people who are associated with this debate would kind of know. This is from his 2019 July paper. I really can't believe this. He's still talking about the Mitanni text is older than that of the Rig Veda, which has been very clearly contested by Shrikant Telagiri in multiple situations. In 2019, he's citing a 1999 paper for the evidence of iron at circa 1000 BCE and claiming that as the terminus antiquum for when Ved should have been composed. Whereas in 2003, Tiwari has come out with a paper which demonstrates iron going back to 1900 BCE. Now this guy teaches at Harvard. We want to know what is the rigor which is being followed in this process, right? Why is evidence not being considered? Why is later evidence? There's just no engagement with the other side. Now that is hardly academic, right? Or we don't think so at least. Then he says that the fantastical dating of Rig Veda at 3000 BCE and its complete identity with the Harappan Indus civilization. That's why I gave you that book, G.D. Bakshi ji, right? That is a tome by Bhagwan Singh, 1995, on the Vedic Harappans. It's a must read for those who have not seen it. But 3000 BCE would be considered today conservative for people who are familiar with archaeoastronomy when it comes to Rig Veda. It would be a very, very conservative estimate. And TRS Prasanna presents a very compelling Vedic rituals argument, both in his 2015 and 2018. Now, this is completely sidelined. Prasanna is publishing in peer-reviewed journals as well, right? There's just no engagement because the domain has been completely eliminated or not part of the discussion. Vedic Harappans, S.P. Gupta has written about it, S.R. Rao has written about it, Bhagwan Singh, A.K. Bagh in his archaeoastronomy paper has also found certain corroborations. And finally, in 2019, he's still talking about the horse. So Manogna and I were joking that we will ride on Manjul's chariot with an Indian horse and go and meet him, right? So thank you. That was our paper on the Aryan problem. Now we'll come to Saraswati after this. Yeah.